Hello, everyone. I'm Maria Picone, the managing editor of Chestnut Review and the Prose Chapbook Contest, and I am here with a very special guest, which is the 2022 winner of our Prose Chapbook Contest, Dacia Price. Dacia's chapbook, this is for the naming, will be available in mid-May, and we're so excited to publish her work. So Dacia, it's really great to have you here today to talk with us a bit and illuminate this awesome work that is coming out in the world soon.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so thrilled to have it out in the world and so excited to be here with you.
Thanks. So this chapbook to me, when I first encountered it, seemed like such a perfectly wedded hybrid of poetical forms and devices and lyricism with these small CNF flash that are kind of strung together. They're kind of braided. So how did the genesis of this project come to be? Have you been somebody who's always worked in like this hybrid form, or was this something that you've developed?
Yeah, I think I always aspired to work in hybrid form. And the deeper I get into my craft and my practice, the more hybrid it becomes, sometimes unintentionally so. I might start out with something that is like what feels very straightforward, very CNF, sort of memoir-esque. And then through the writing, I find myself making more hybrid choices. Yeah, so I think organically, I probably am a much more hybrid writer than even I sort of anticipate for myself. But this collection actually came about as a result of a challenge of creating a flash piece of CNF every single week underneath a constraint. And the constraint for me was the things that lurk in the shadows. That was sort of a self-imposed constraint. And I found myself just writing all of these sort of flash pieces that ended up being in conversation with the loss of my mother and cancer. And before I knew it, I had created this whole sort of braided collection that was all kind of in conversation with itself.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love that. Things that lurk in the shadows. That's
Yeah.
so evocative. And I can't believe it
Very
took you to
dramatic.
this place. No, that's wonderful. Um, so how did you determine, right? There's a couple devices that are used throughout, such as one paragraph sections with breaks. There's also slashes that are straight, like the bar ones, and a use of dashes. How did you determine this sort of punctuation and paragraph or stanza graph based sort of formal language in which to have this medium?
Yeah, God, that is such a good question. And I don't know if I have a specific answer on the methodology. Often it sort of falls down on instinct. I think for me, when I was putting it together, I kept sort of imagining two voices, sort of a duality within the self, so that
Mhm.
there is sort of a call and a response, or a thought and a list. So the double lines that you see throughout this piece is sort of an articulation of that two voice element that I'm trying to sort of navigate in my brain as I'm composing this. And same with the slashes. Sometimes I'm using them as visual representations. Sometimes it's breath work where I'm wanting my reader to sort of take a big inhale or pause in their breath before they move on. And so it's sort of, yeah, sort of behaving as both visual as well as bodily kind of moments of pause or delineation, if that makes sense.
No, I love that. I'm like taking notes over here. This is amazing. Um, Another thing that really struck me about this collection was your use of italics for dialogue, or sometimes just straight. There's no quotation marks. It's not the usual convention in prose. It's more of a poetical convention, or perhaps like an experimental prose convention. So was that another thing that kind of got developed along with this project, where that felt natural?
No, that one actually was very intentional. As a reader, I find I just find that sort of typical dialogue markers to be a little boring, a little dull. Some of the writers that I admire the most are the ones that sort of put their dialogue, they embed it within the prose itself. And so it just sort of allows the reader to kind of speed through it all so that there's not really a difference, because there often isn't much of a difference. The dialogue that you're saying or hearing or experiencing is happening in tandem with your experience of that. And so I really love just this idea of embedding it in there and allowing my reader to differentiate between what's being said and what's being experienced.
Wow, I love that. And I think it really works not only with the fact that like readers have to do some of that work, but also in this idea that it's sort of a two-voice collection talking about the self and like this, right? Because it feels more external, more like a rupturing to use these sort of dialogue tags and things. And I think that that was one thing that really kept me reading this collection over and over again in the queue. So yeah, I think it's a really strong usage, and it has the effect that you intend.
Thank you.
Okay.
But
Oh, that's
I'm glad.
awesome. Yeah. So a few of your pieces are kind of in hermit crab form, but all of them have some sort of image or kind of almost like a visual aid at the beginning that sort of introduces a mood, a theme, right? I love that because from the title, you can either continue vibing off of that or even introduce like a different sort of moment or feeling to the collection. So when did this gain sort of a visual art component?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there was a moment. I feel
Hmm.
like each piece sort of went through its own process from a construction of like lines and narrative, and then sort of shifted into a visual representation. I'm a very visual person in the way that I interact with the world, and so I tend to experience things from that place of visual sort of stimulus. And so those are often my access points into narrative. I'll usually start from a place of seeing or a place of noticing, and then I'll kind of get into the crux of it. And so because it kind of starts from this visual origin and then goes through narrative, I think it's sort of a natural progression that it ends up having that sort of visual effect on the page, that we end from a place of visibility, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I think it really works. And again, right, this is one thing that we talk about voice, and it's almost a cliche, but like this collection had such a strong voice when it walked in the queue. It was like, as the author, I could feel this is this work, this is what I want for it, this is what's here, and welcome, right? It just felt sort of like almost when you see like one of those magazine spreads and it's a home that's been beautifully curated and the interior decoration is like perfect. It really felt like every aspect complemented each other aspect, and that just made it like this roller coaster ride to read. That
Oh, that is
just
amazing. That might be
Yeah.
the best compliment I've ever gotten. Thank you so much for that.
No, I was so excited when I saw this for the first time, and I thought to myself, even if she never wanted to do a single edit, I love this, let's publish it. So, of course, it went through a whole reading process. But when I was reading it, I was sitting, I think I was on my couch, just sitting there with my iPad. Like, I think my eyes got bigger as I kept scrolling through every page.
Oh, I love that so much. You have no idea. That just like makes my heart swell.
Sure. So I saw that I think you're an MFA candidate currently, is that right?
Yeah, I'm just about to go into my third year of MFA candidacy. So I'll graduate next year from Northern Michigan University.
Awesome. So do you think that that experience has had a hand in making this work and sort of guiding not only your craft, but like this specific project?
Yeah, absolutely. This emerged from a class that I was taking, and so it wouldn't exist without that class, certainly. I hate to say that like an MFA program changed my writing for the better, but it really did. I don't think that you need an MFA in order to be a fabulous writer, but I think the advantage of being in an MFA program is exposure to writers and work that you would never encounter otherwise. And the more you read, the more you're influenced by that reading, and the more inspired you become by the work of other people. And then, of course, you've got these beautiful workshops where you can sit down with other writers and in similar sort of career places as you, and you can feed off of each other and vibe and offer criticisms and noticings, and all of these things just work to improve or grow a writer and their craft exponentially. So I cannot say enough wonderful things about both this program as well as just the MFA more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that, of course, it's not an option for everybody. It's not maybe necessary or great for everyone, but certainly I feel exactly what you. I did a low residency MFA, and my second advisor for the last year was a playwright, and it
Mm.
just changed how I thought about writing. It changed everything because we were assigned plays to read. It was the first time I was really engaging with them, not as like a high school English student reading Shakespeare, but like I don't know. I think it really had a big impact on my development that I didn't even realize at the time, because I just thought, well, I'm a fiction writer. Why do I need plays? And now I'm like, wow, those are some of the most memorable things I remember from my time there.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
same. I would never consider myself to be a poet or know anything about poetics or poetry, but taking poetry classes has very much influenced the work that I'm producing. And the thing about writing is that it's such a solitary act that the more opportunity you can give yourself to surround yourself with other writers, other artists, other creators in that way, the more it's going to improve your work, because you're going to have that sense of community that you don't get otherwise. And that's what an MFA program is, right? Sort of
Yeah,
built-in community.
yeah, absolutely. So is this your first chapbook?
It is. Yeah.
I
I
can't
know. I'm
believe
so
it.
excited.
Oh, it's really wonderful. What's on tap for you? Are you working on a longer project?
I am. Well, I've got thesis writing to do for my program, so it's sort of part of that. I'm working on a longer collection of ruminations on grief, but specifically the ways in which animals experience grief and the rituals that we create around death and our interactions with bodies and the loss of loved ones. There's going to be a religious element to it. There's one point in time I go and see a medium and try to like commune with the dead. So it's just this exploration of that delineation between like living and death, and when a body dies, when a person dies, how animals interact with death.
Hmm. That's really interesting, Nisha. I wonder about that too. I was, yeah, I think, I don't know as much about that, obviously, but it sounds super interesting. I had a cat, that I adopted like, oh my God, it was almost 10 years ago, and he was old. He only lived for a year after I adopted him, but after he passed, I felt like I needed a ritual to be allowed to grieve, because of course, like I grew up Catholic, so we have elaborate funerals, we have wakes, we have like, the option to like write something. Like my family, they're not really like writers, but they would write these beautiful like poems or kind of ruminations on someone to commemorate events and to remember people. So I remember like reading what my dad wrote about my great uncle, etc. And I actually didn't feel any of that, because it was like, oh, Maria, I'm so sad for you, but it's a cat. So I actually hired an animal medium to sort of commune, because I wasn't ready to let go. I wanted to have these ceremonies and sort of this marker that justified how horrible I felt inside with my grief. So, I mean, I have lost loved ones. So of course, when I was reading your chap, it wasn't just like, oh, my cat. But I mean, I think that these feelings are really important, and especially as we all gain this awareness of like how interconnected we are with the natural world, but also we're gaining this sort of feeling of like we're anthropomorphizing our pets more, we're caring more about their inner life and sort of the phenomenology of what it's like to be an animal or inside the mind of an animal, both to explain like climate change movements and like other things that intersect, but also to explain why our beloved pets do certain things. I think that's a really ripe area to explore in terms of like coming at it creatively. And of course, you've shown a lot of research chops in this, like, or a lot of research chops in this chapbook. So I think
I
it's a
love
wonderful synthesis. Yeah.
I love the research part, probably as much as I love the writing part. So so that's an advantage. Yeah, I think that there's been a real reluctance for most of humanity to ascribe emotions to animals, to
Yeah.
allow them to experience something as complicated as grief, for example. And I think that you're right. I think that we're sort of emerging into a moment in which we are perhaps more willing to consider that as a possibility. And the moment we consider that, the delineation between the human and the non-human animal becomes a little bit more blurred. And as a result of that, we're able to perhaps better understand how and who and what we are on this planet and our relationships with the natural world. And yeah, I think it's really important work, actually,
Yeah.
to just sort of consider the non-human animal in a way that allows them to be themselves and not a representation of a human or human emotions or metaphor or analogy,
Yeah.
just to exist in their own right.
Absolutely. Right. I have a background in philosophy. So like in philosophy of mind and stuff, like there's a lot of work on what qualia animals experience and like how that translates into emotional states. Because of course, even for us, right, our perceptual states translate eventually into emotional states or feelings. So how does that work? Like how does it happen?
Mm.
Um, yeah. Do you have a background in any sort of research or other
Nothing formal. I'm very interested in animal studies as sort of an emerging literary criticism sort of field. And so I am sort of drawn to Derrida and Descartes and Agamben and different people who have sort of spent some time considering the animal.
yeah.
But no, nothing formal.
Well, that's wonderful, Dacia. I mean, it's really great. I think it really proves that, right? Sometimes writers are just like, oh, you're so out there, you're just like imagining or making things up. But like, yeah, I think our job is to graph the world. And sometimes we need to do research in order to feed our creative self and like keep that fire going. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Um, so what do you think is next for you, not just in terms of like creative projects, but what do you want to do after you finish your MFA?
That is the magical question. Oh, it's so unfortunate that we live in a society that doesn't sort of monetize art in the same way that they monetize labor. And so to try and sort of carve a path as an artist in this capitalist world is really, really challenging. Even when you seek, formal education and collect degrees. So I think realistically, I will probably stay in the academy, whether it's pursuing a PhD or trying to get a teaching position. That seems like the most capitalist thing for me to do. Emotionally, all I want to do is write. I mean, I would absolutely love to figure out a way to just do that full time, write and research, and just travel rabbit holes and scaffold the world in which we live, through art making. That would be amazing.
Yeah, no, I wish the same thing, and I wish that for you too.
I
I
wish it for all of us. I wish all of us could just exist as artists and not have to relegate it to a side hustle.
oh for sure. I mean,
Mhm.
I would still publish other people.
Yeah, oh,
I really
absolutely.
like that aspect of it. But yes,
Yeah, it's too
um,
bad that there's not a whole lot of money in publishing or literary journals either.
yeah,
I mean, otherwise that would be wonderful too.
yeah,
It's terrible that we have to have this conversation and include money. Like we can't just be
yes.
like, how do you see your life unfolding? And we can just say art making forever and ever. Instead, we have to sort of ground it in this capitalist reality, and that is devastating.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mm. So I wanted to ask you with CNF, right? A lot of authors that I work with or that I take workshops and things with, they're always curious about the boundaries that we set, not only when we have a traumatic event or experience and now we're writing about it, but also in terms of like the people that we might affect directly with our writing. So where do you fall in terms of that equation? Was it difficult for you to write this project in terms of like external pushback or sort of internal feelings, like because you're writing about these topics like grief and sickness that are so heavy and so compelling, but I feel like sometimes it's hard to feel good about ourselves when we're writing these things because we feel like we're revealing something sort of private or even sacred.
Yeah, this collection in particular is very vulnerable. There is a lot of exposure. When I submitted it, I definitely had that sort of, oh gosh, how do I want to describe this? I guess I sort of went at it like, this is just my work and I'm just going to throw it out into the universe and I'm not really going to think about it. Um, but actually going through this process with you and having it now in the world and not just within the confines of a selected essay in a literary journal, but as a cohesive collection, as a book, I have had to do a lot of reckoning with the vulnerability and the exposure. Not only is this very much about my own sort of hand wringing and wrangling with the loss of my mother and feelings of guilt and shame around her death and that sort of fear of cancer. But it's also very familial. There's a lot of my family in this.
Yeah,
And that does, for CNF writers, more so than perhaps any other genre, that does pose a sort of ethical dilemma, on what we say, how we say it, who might read and hear it. And it is a constant negotiation. Everybody I know that writes CNF struggles with this, and everybody approaches it slightly differently because everybody has their own stakes.
yeah,
For me, I feel like as long as nothing I'm saying is false or accusatory, and I'm approaching it through a lens of complexity, appreciating that each of us are complex people who make complicated choices in complicated moments. And as long as I believe that that's translated on the page, then I feel like ethically I've made the right choices.
yeah.
And we'll see. We'll just sort of see how it goes. But it is really hard as a CNF writer to put stuff like this out into the world. Yeah, lots of hand wringing for sure.
I mean, I think it's, to me, and this is like as a person, like this isn't like the interview, like sorry interview people, but like, from me to you. Um, I've read a lot of collections that, like, not just collections, but like individual pieces, like CNF pieces, where people are talking about these heavy, super important, vulnerable topics. And I feel like you can always tell when somebody is skimming the surface. Maybe there's something there that, like, they're not ready to get to, but maybe the audience, like the readers, can see, okay, we know there's something there, and it's fine if you don't want to tell us what that is, but you have to find some way to write around it that communicates the stakes of this. And I felt when I read This Is for the Naming that it was a beautifully honest look at all the different angles. And I thought that the rumination, like the anaphora and the repetition, was one of the things that helped it be like this sort of, I mean, I don't think it's like hand wringing at all. I mean, these are sort of the human things, right? This is like the human element that I feel was captured so authentically and powerfully because you could go to that vulnerable place and you could really make me feel everything that you were feeling, everything that was like there in the self, or even in this like dual voiced self that is driving this collection, because that's it's so important to have that. So I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because even though we haven't had the same experiences, and I, so in that sense, like I don't have something to compare it to. I feel like for that brief instant when I was reading your chap, and every time I come back to it and read it, even when I'm looking for proofreading formatting mistakes, I feel like I feel exactly what you wanted me to feel. And that is so powerful to me as a reader and as a human being. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I really appreciate that feedback. I think the best CNF writing is incredibly vulnerable writing. I think that that is where the emotions lie. That's where we get that emotional resonance. And yeah, and it's heart work is what it
Yeah.
is. Heart work that's just in the public domain. And that's what makes it feel particularly vulnerable, but also what makes it most powerful. And I'm so glad that for you, this chapbook did that it was
Yeah.
powerful for you.
Yes, absolutely.
It's powerful for me
That's
writing it for sure.
yes. I can see that. It's so wonderful. If you make a craft doc, I have written down the phrase "heart work" in the public domain and underlined it like many times. So if you're ever
Amazing.
looking for a craft doc topic, I think
All right.
you've got it.
Artwork in the public domain. I love it. I'm going to write that down too.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. All right. Well, Dacia, thank you so much for the interview. It's really been a pleasure to work with you, to see this project from when it popped in our Smutable queue. And I was like, oh, I don't know how to pronounce this person's first name to now. So yes, I'm so excited that this will be out in the world next month. And yeah, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for submitting it to Chestnut.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for selecting it. I am thrilled to have it out there. It's been such a joy to work with you, and I cannot wait to have this book in my hands and be able to read it and share it and yeah, and just have it exist. So
Yeah,
thank you so much.
1000%. Okay.